Welcome to episode number 6 of the OBRY Hours. I'm your host, John. I guess, I think this episode is going to be kind of all over the place. I don't have a specific topic in mind with copious notes. I don't often have copious notes. Because if I have a particular topic that requires copious notes, that topic is usually going to be put into a presentation of some sort. So I actually attempted recording this episode a number of times, and just every time I would get, maybe 45 minutes into it before my son awoke, which it's kind of the signal that that's done, usually for the day. And every time I wasn't too pleased. I just thought, nah. So, I guess there are a few things that are happening I just wanted to talk a little bit about, because I haven't. And I'm not saying my opinion on these things are necessarily more weighty, that they matter more than other people's opinions, because, since this whole COVID thing started, there's been a lot of opinions out there. I mean, people aren't sparing them. And that's fine. I get it. The big problem, one of the big problems is, out of all the people out there that have been sharing their opinion on this, from various different viewpoints, I honestly don't believe, for me personally, that I've heard any one person, or even if I could put together all of the commentaries I've heard from all of the people commenting on all the various facets of what's been going on since, March 2020. So that's a long time, right? It's 13 months now. I don't think I could honestly say that any of them have, to my satisfaction, offered a very complete and entirely relevant, productive information. Now, yeah, there's been a lot of information out there, but keep something in mind. It is the red model to inundate on any topic, especially ones that are very important, to inundate with every kind of possible information. And what they do is, so they know the score, they know what's going on, they know their plan, they've think tanked these things out way in advance, folks. Don't ever approach this with this sort of mindset that these people are playing it as they go. They aren't doing that. They've thought these things out long in advance. And I mean, some of the things that we saw them do just in the last couple of decades, they were thinking that stuff through almost a century ago. How they would go about it and the time frames. They take great pains in executing their designs upon us. So it's naive to think that they're playing as they go. Now, yeah, they may do they may put feelers out. So this is where they'll run a story. The story might say that, say, a certain state government or maybe a certain country is considering or has done a certain thing that perhaps much of the population that matters to them could be against. And they'll run stories like that as feelers, and they'll run them digitally, because that's what the internet is for them. The internet for them is it's a device for capturing a lot of data from the people that they are that they're warring against. They're capturing a lot of data from us people, and they're using it to basically to run their models. And they use that data, when they do their think tanks and working out how they're going to go about something. So they might run a story on one of their digital news outlets and leave the comments open. In fact, that's one of the main reasons that even bigger so-called news outlets will leave their comments open, because they're trying to gauge reaction. They're trying to gauge where people are at and in what way. They'll use that information as they decide which option they're going to go with. And now again, these options, they've thought through a long time ago. So they're not doing much or any on-the-fly activity. If they put out these sorts of feelers and they gauge, a certain reaction that is within a certain percent of a particular people being of a certain mindset and possibly taking certain action in a certain way, they have already thought that through. They've think tanked those possibilities, and what they do is they will just decide to go with a particular course of action that they've already thought through. So at present, they're holding all the information cards. They have all of the information on exactly what the nature of, let's say, COVID-19, what the nature of it is. And I am calling it it. I am referring to it as a thing, in the least as a concept. Because I don't think, based on the information that I've seen, that it actually qualifies as a real, definable thing. It is a concept. COVID-19, the concept. They're the ones that have all of the information cards on precisely what it is. Now, you can go and I would recommend, if you want to know, go to the CDC's website and read the paper that they produced in, I think it was June of 2020, wherein they claimed to have isolated the COVID-19 virus. And you're going to have to pay very close attention to what it is they say they have done in order to isolate that virus. And then you really need to pay attention to things like how the PCR test works, because that's what they've been using. That's what they used to in their claims of isolating this virus. they use the PCR test. You have to pay very close attention to how many base pairs that you need in order to have a complete chain in an identifiable virus. To my knowledge and understanding, they have never successfully proven this COVID-19 is a real virus and that it is the culprit behind the deaths and sicknesses they're reporting on. Now, unfortunately, so many people are not approaching this in a purely rational way. There is a lot of emotion here. There are so many people out there that, first off, are so afraid of dying. And of course, dying by asphyxiation, which is an unpleasant way to die. I don't know how many pleasant ways there are to die. I have known some people who did pass actually quickly, and though I didn't watch them expire, and I'm talking about, sorry about that. I'm talking about my own father. I did not watch him expire, but I was with him in the same home when he did. And when I had left him, I had we had a temporary power outage, and I had changed his electric plug into the wall oxygen machine. I had hooked up tanks. We had backup tanks, in case that happened. Hooked those up, got him going on that. He was breathing, everything was fine. And it was in the evening. He was watching television in his room. We had a medical bed set up in his room. And I left to do a few things, and was probably only gone for 5-10 minutes. When I came back, he was gone. He had expired. Now, just to, without being emotional about it, it's a difficult thing for a man to watch his father die. Even if they don't have a close relationship with him, maybe sometimes if the relationship is very strained, it can be even more emotional, because there's that regret of things not being what you'd hoped for, So it was very emotional for me. But the point is this: from the time that I left him to the time that I came back to check on him, there were no signs there that he went through a struggle. They just weren't there. When I came back in, he was, it just looked exactly the same way that he had when I left him, except he was gone. I mean, it was just literally that. So I have to believe, and based on some of the reports of people dying in their sleep and other ways of them expiring peacefully, it wouldn't seem that every time somebody expires, it is always a painful and traumatic thing. I could be wrong, but just saying. However, a lot of times it is. And so it seems like there's these masses of people out there, they're so utterly frightened, and they've been by the television and news, things that they shouldn't be watching, things they shouldn't be believing, that they're looking at the potential of expiring in a terribly traumatic way. Nobody wants to expire in a terribly traumatic way if they can help it, right? And nobody wants their family members to expire in a traumatic way if they can help it. So this is what a lot of the hysteria and the measures that they have been able to pass are based on. People's fears. They don't want to die a certain way. They don't want to get terribly sick. They don't want this to happen. They don't want that to happen. So they're afraid. So they're going along with a governing body that has not ever shown us anything that would make us trust what they have to say. And that's where we are. And the thing is, look, so since this started, I've been reading more on very alternative topics as far as sickness, like sickness and disease and other things in our modern age goes. The one book that I did get a while back, and I've been going through it kind of slowly because it can be heavy reading, it real loaded with certain terminology that you have to get used to, get kind of stuck in your brain. So you know what concepts are. If you read anything and you come across a term or a word that you don't know how, either if it's just a common word and you don't know exactly how it's supposed to be used, or if you come across a specific term and you don't know exactly what's being implied, you should really read with a very good dictionary close at hand so that you do really understand what you're reading. Because you let one word go as you're reading, and it can really topple your whole understanding, and it can be a big waste of time. So there are a lot of words in this book. There's a lot of terminology in this book that I am not familiar with, and I have to familiarize myself with it as it goes. So I haven't been reading it fast. It is The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg. Yes, the last name makes me a little nervous. But a lot of the facts that are cited in there are nonetheless facts. I don't particularly know Furstenberg's specific ethnicity, where we can trace his people back to. I don't know that about most of the people out there being published, celebrities and politicians and the wealthy and power brokers and all of that. But I can guess, I think with a pretty good degree of accuracy, that these people aren't Germanics and Gaulish. Yet Germanics and Gaulish, that really covers a very wide spectrum of European people. Mostly people that are poor or blue-collar, working class, the kind of people who from the start built the infrastructure of America, were brought here as slaves, are still slaves to this day, maybe even in worse ways than they used to be. So, if I say Germanic, Gaulish, it does kind of covers a wide variety of people, but it certainly does not cover all white people, because that term white is a very deceptive, very weaponized term. We've got to get that out of our heads. Okay, so without getting off on that tangent over there, let's just say this. Based on everything that I've seen from this book, The Invisible Rainbow, and from some other sources too, and I am very particular about what sources I use as far as who they're coming from. And I'll tell you what, that really limits the sources. Yeah. What you have to do is you basically have to develop this technique of looking at everything as a with this sort of litmus test in mind. What is it that this source that I'm hearing this information from stands to gain if I were to believe and act upon their information? Who is this source? Who is this source tied to? And then you have to distill whatever information that you get. It can be tiring. It can be really tiring. And so I understand with because it's information warfare. They put out tons and tons of bad information, and some of that information is good, and a lot of that information is partially good, and it's put out by bad actors. Some of it is put out by good actors who are ignorant or who aren't looking at the big picture or refuse to see certain components in the whole, and therefore it clouds their judgment. And I mean, this just basically makes for a huge mess. A huge mess when it comes to information. So, yeah. Now you got to start thinking about, based on the information I've read so far, in the Hidden Rainbow, I have read some papers by a guy named Samuel Milham. He has a website. I think it's sammilham, maybe.com, where a number of his shorter papers have been published, and you can buy his book, Dirty Electricity. And I've had to start learning things like the effects that early radio waves and let's just call it basically like electrical radiation, waves that can radiate from various electrical sources, including power lines and so on. There is osmosis that actually can happen through materials that are very conductive, like metal, like your metal pipes in your house that are carrying your water, can actually conduct the various waves, electrical, microwave, radio waves. There are different waves, there are different techniques that one must use when trying to ascertain what the sort of pollution of whether we're talking about electromagnetic frequencies, EMFs, or whether we're talking about microwave frequencies. They're very different. You can get an EMF app for your phone, relatively cheap for, I guess, what is rated as a good one. That's all I've used so far, though I really would rather just get a well-made EMF detector. Or if they make, I haven't looked into this completely yet, if they actually make a meter that accurately tests for both microwaves and EMFs, then you just get all in one. However, I think the cheapest, the radio wave, microwave detectors out there, push $300. That's the cheaper ones. That's not the ones that are claiming to be, highly accurate, very well made. So, unless you're willing to spend at least a few $100s, you're not going to know what waves are commonly in your environment and what sources they're coming from the most. And here's the rub, is that, for instance, Furstenberg, as well as Milham, and they do cite other doctors who have produced papers or talked about this, have done experiments, scientific experiments, not pseudoscience, scientific experiments, that show a very strong correlation, great deal of evidence linking the pollution in our air, the absolutely invisible pollution. I wouldn't say non-perceivable, because there are some people out there who actually perceive this far better than others. And I might talk about them, because I do happen to believe that I'm one of them, and there's reasons for that. But our environment it's pretty saturated with radiation, EMFs, microwave, radio frequencies, radiation coming from power lines being bounced around in the air. And there are a lot of studies, and there are a lot of phenomenon that would suggest that there is a very likely correlation between, let's just say, recent plagues. So let's just say from the mid-1800s to today, that have everything to do with the amount of radiation that is around us. Some of us have far greater levels of radiation and EMFs where we live and where we sleep. If you have a modem router, I can't talk today, a modem router from an internet company, and if you have Wi-Fi and you have Wi-Fi turned on, you are being bombarded with, it's a very short, very sharp microwave. 5G technology. It's not theoretical. Of course, it's not. I don't see this information as something put out there just to sow confusion or cause unnecessary fear. 5G microwave technology is successfully used in military situations. For instance, for crowd dispersal. It can have a very strong impact on those who are you are using it on. I've turned off the 5G in my house. Now, it took me time to figure out how to do this. So what I did was I ran my house outside the walls, because right now we don't own this place. We're renting because my wife's finishing school where we're at, and then we're going to move. So it's not permanent. So I ran all of these wires. They're outside the wall. Put them all up with, basically wiring clips that you can get. You can get a bag of 100 for a few bucks. Tucked them in wherever I could. Ran Ethernet cables basically to the main sources that needed them. So I have a desktop that I use. I ran a cable to that. We have an all-in-one printer scanner thing that has been designed to work in a Wi-Fi environment. So I wired hard into that. And what I have to now do, I have to run experiments to see if it could easily be communicated with actually just through the Ethernet cables, because I'm using the Aris modem router that we got because we have Xfinity. I'm using that as the hub. And so I got everything wired up, the desktop. We only have one television in one room because we don't want to live our lives kind of around television. So it's in our bedroom, and it's supposed to basically just only be watched at special times. We didn't want it to be a regular thing, like in the living room as a centerpiece or something. So anyways, I got a LAN connection there. So the all-in-one printer, the desktop, and those are the ones that always have an Ethernet cable in them. Besides that, there was an Ethernet cable ran to behind the couch where we often might sit, and then to two places in the kitchen where we would commonly be working at, either my wife with her laptop or via a smartphone. Okay. And then had to get smartphone adapters, one of them being broke, which put me way behind in trying to figure out all this stuff because I didn't know the one was broke. So it took time. And I finally got it to where I figured out how to communicate with the modem router and how to disable the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi and the 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi. And then there's also this thing called Mocha, and I don't entirely understand how Mocha is supposed to work or why it's supposed to be so great. So right now I'm dealing with trying to figure that out and whether or not it's not going to be good to have it on. I've got a friend coming by actually tomorrow. Today is April 20. I got a friend coming by tomorrow who actually worked for Xfinity. Hopefully he can provide me with some insights on these things. Yeah, there's stuff that you can read about. The problem is, like, for instance, when you go to try to read about Mocha, if you don't want to spend, an hour or two reading, you're trying to get a good feel for what it is, what it's doing. Is it good or bad for me? And most of everything I've found about Mocha so far is... it's just like promotional, and it's not really giving you a lot of meat. Not saying that if I found something on Mocha that was real meaty that I would understand it right out of the gate, because all of this stuff is, again, it's like a lot of the material from Hidden Rainbow. There are a lot of very specific terms that imply many things that you may not understand if you don't understand these things. I did get an app. I got an EMF app for my phone to measure things around the house. So what I found out is, wow, I didn't know. So any appliance around your house basically can emit a certain amount of electromagnetic frequencies. And then I found out about this concept through Furstenberg, and it's mostly a Samuel Milham, Milham. The website's sammilham, I think.com. There's this idea of, it's called dirty electricity that he talks about. Now, he does have a book. I did order his book, so the book should be here really soon. Let me see if I can give you a little bit of a rundown without opening up any of his papers, so you can kind of get where I'm coming from on all this and see what the implications are. So there's different ways that electricity can be made, and that electrical waves or radio waves can be broadcast. There is the clean way, which the clean way that it can be made and broadcasted, you could see on a meter. If you had one that was actually showing you the wave itself that it was detecting. If it showed it you as a sine wave, that's S-I-N-E, a sine wave, it would show you a very smooth wave, peaking and troughing in very smooth, even, curvaceous troughs and peaks. Very smooth, very even, peaking and troughing. This sort of electromagnetic frequency or wave is not only not known to be harmful in tests that have been done. Again, a lot of these tests were done 100 years ago. They've worked very hard to make us very, very ignorant of what's going on in our air and how polluted our air is with electromagnetic frequencies and radio waves, and which ones are good, bad, or otherwise. And maybe I can get into that a little bit. But so a sine wave, it's not only not known through the tests that have been done on it to be bad or detrimental to our health in any way. A lot of sine waves and sine wave type therapies, listening to things that are coming through in a even sine wave, being I don't know what the word is, drenched in a sine wave frequency that could be coming from essentially some sort of a unit that generates a nice even sine wave, is not seen to be detrimental, but in many ways in tests that were done actually seem to be beneficial. So you have your sine wave that these electrical frequencies can come out, and anybody who is a musician, electronic musician, would know that, for instance, there are effects pedals out there that will allow you to change the frequency of an effect, or the frequency that the actual signal that's going into the pickup and coming through the amplifier. You can change the frequency of that signal, and some of them, when you change these frequencies, or you can change, for instance, pickup polarities and other things, you'll find that some of them are more pleasing than others. Some of these frequency shifts are, at least in my opinion, very unpleasing, displeasing. I think this idea of the way that frequency waves, radio waves, and sound waves are shaped, how they're formed, how they're shaped, and how they reach us, and whether those things are beneficial or detrimental. A lot of it has to do with the way that they're created. Now, I haven't had the time yet to look into the specific way that that sound waves are created in a vacuum tube environment as opposed to a transistor environment. However, it's definitely something I think I will at some point. And the reason being is this. I found out early on as a musician. I've been a musician since I was about a teenager. I started playing guitar at about 15. Like seriously playing around 15, close to 16. And within about a year or so, I was able to play with others in a band. And I had a band not long after that, and continued to do that for a long time until I actually developed a condition that is very interesting, what I developed and what time I developed. And from that point on, things in my life got extremely rocky, and there were events that really shifted the whole course that my life was on. Because, to be honest with you, I actually wanted to be a professional musician. I was quite good at it. I played guitar. I played bass, just about anything with strings and frets. I could play and figure out. They're not all that different. Some have a little bit different tuning scheme, but not all that different. Probably the most different of the stringed and fretted instruments is a banjo, but who the hell wants to play that anyways? So, anyways, that was a joke. But really, what was that quote by Mark Twain? Didn't Mark Twain have a quote about the banjo? About somebody who's really, really smart, knows how to play the banjo, but doesn't. Anyways, for all the banjo players out there, really, I didn't mean that as a shot. I'm just kidding. I really actually love the banjo for certain things. It's one of those instruments that is very particular to certain kinds of music, and when it's used properly, it's irreplaceable. So, anyways, that's what I wanted to do. Of course, I didn't know who ran the music industry. I didn't know who ran everything. I didn't realize things like I would never really have any chance to get all that far in it, no matter how good I could be. At best, what would happen, and this is what happens with many of our people. And when I say our, I am specifically speaking to those of you who have ancestry that go back to the Gaulish tribes and the Germanic tribes, because those are the Israelite tribes. And it does cover a lot if you don't realize that you are descended from one of those tribes. Look into it. It's important. Because I'm going to refer very specifically to the Gauls and the Germanics. These are really the two great nations made up of tribes that represent Israel in their various either gluts or travels and dispersions. Okay, so there's no way that they're going to put somebody of Gaulish and Germanic heritage in any kind of high or sensitive position. At best, they might take the ones who are, let's say, very talented at maybe something that one of the other tribes that they count on or use more just couldn't do. And maybe they'll put them to work in some kind of very controlled environment. Or they'll take our women, especially the pretty ones, and just use them as much as possible. Sometimes, if they can, they'll breed with them, thus killing our genetics with theirs. Or they'll just debase them because they take pleasure in debasing our women. So all the women out, and they do it through many things. You know, they've used feminism to debase our women. This artificial empowerment they use to debase our women. This is not an empowerment. This is not a good thing. It is debasing our women, convincing them that a career is more a thing to be sought after than having children is a debasement. Convincing them that there is an equality between them and the man, which Yahweh never established an equality. There is not. There is a sharp difference, and we complement one another in that difference. But that is a debasement, convincing them they are something that they are not. They are debasing them. And then whenever they have the opportunity, they will debase them in the sense of using them as whores and abusing them, hooking them on drugs if they need to. And that's what you're going to get. If you're from Germanic, Gaulish, thus Israelite lineage, you're not going to go that far. Right. long rabbit trail, coming back to when I was young and I developed a condition around a certain time, a very interesting time. Seemed a bit out of the blue, and I thought I had some answers to why it happened until recently. I think I actually know why. But back then, it didn't take all that long for me to start understanding that there was a real difference. Not only in the sound, but in the way a different amplifier sounds amplified through a different device actually were more pleasing from some and less pleasing from others. Now, something being more pleasing or less pleasing like that it's very telling. It doesn't always necessarily mean quote good and or quote bad necessarily, but it is telling. One thing that you'll find is a lot of people in the music industry who, let's say these people are maybe what you would consider sort of purists, will not use solid state amplification. This is using transistors in processing and amplifying the signal. Now, no, I don't know neither transistor nor vacuum tube technology really well so that I can sit here and talk about it really intelligently. But I'm telling you, there is a difference in the way that the two different types of amplifiers, solid state, using transistors, or vacuum tube, actually create the signals and the sounds that they put out. They take the input signal, which is your guitar pickups. They pick up the vibration of the strings and any percussive hits that you might do on the instrument. They take in those vibrations. They put them through a wire. It's called patch cords, and oftentimes they'll be processed through a number of effects pedals, maybe to give them distortion or flange, maybe to equalize them so you can change certain parameters of the sound before it gets to the amplifier. Because really, what the amplifier is doing is it's essentially just increasing the sound. It's increasing the volume of the sound. Now, amplifiers can have a lot to do with shaping the tone. Many amplifiers out there are highly sought after because they're quite good at shaping the tone as well. For me as a musician, what I require in an amplifier is the ability to increase volume. That's basically it. I want to control everything else, usually separately from the amplifier. But the thing is, most amplifiers are also going to have a gain. Gain's good because gain can take you from something that is much cleaner sounding to something that has a certain type of overdrive to it that you may not be getting in, let's just say, the effects that you might be using. All right, and then most of them are going to have their high, their middle, and their low. And these are just a way to shape the tone. Okay? Something like a Marshall JCM 8 or 900 would be an amp that I commonly used for a very long time. very simple. I actually had a really old JCPenney Montgomery Ward amp. This is, I think, when JCPenney were selling their guitars and amps at this time, because it was, I think, from the 70s. They sold most of them under the label Silvertone, which some Silvertone guitars now are worth a lot of money. Go figure. So that's my thing. Anyways, I did also have solid-state amps. I started on a solid-state amp. I started on an old Yamaha 112-inch speaker, solid-state amplifier. And this was one of those amplifiers that they kind of built all the bells and whistles into. They sold it with a switch, so you could switch between the clean channel and the distorted or overdrive channel. The overdrive channel built into this particular amp was kind of terrible. It would be good for some people who like something very fuzzy, undefined. And it actually wasn't even that fuzzy. It was just kind of undefined. But it didn't take long to understand that there was a real difference between solid-state created sound waves and vacuum tube created sound waves. They were very different. You can see the difference in sound waves on like an oscilloscope. If you use an oscilloscope could actually show you a sine wave. Can show you different wave frequencies. And people who work on amplifiers actually commonly use oscilloscopes. Likely most of the time to figure out what might be going wrong with, more often than not, a vacuum tube or a valve amplifier. They're often called valve amplifiers. But that's the thing. So we're talking about the difference between sine waves, a pleasant, even, smooth wave, and something that, for instance, Furstenberg, I haven't heard the term coined before, coined in his book, waves that are broken, sharp, and have teeth. Or basically a smooth wave or a wave with teeth. And the difference in that, apparently, is in the way that these radio waves are made. They're made electrically. Okay, so they are using various devices to greatly amplify what broadcast frequencies they can broadcast at. Because what they need to do, especially in the early days, they needed to be able to broadcast a radio frequency from typically a very high tower in one location, and usually they would be wanting to broadcast that over a body of water. But like before World War I, the U.S. had actually set up this, it was like a mile long, row of these radio towers that were like 400 feet tall. And they were all wired together. And what they were meant to do was to be able to blast a signal, because they didn't have the more powerful, I want to say the more powerful alternators that they had come up with for broadcasting this, because we're also talking about sort of like early days of DC current and AC current, and there's kind of a lot of information about those currents also. For any of you who have seen the movie The Prestige, there's a scene where Edison's goons are going around the country and electrocuting animals with alternating currents to try to smear the work of Nikola Tesla. You know, when you see how, when you see how nicely Nikola Tesla has been treated by the Jewish media, or a lot of Jewish shills out there, even in the last 5 to 10 years, you do have to wonder a little bit about Tesla and his inventions and his alternating currents. I'm not saying he was necessarily a bad guy. I am saying that there are things that they don't want us to know about these things. What you have to understand is, they would typically need more and more powerful apparatuses to transmit their frequency, either through the radio towers, which were just blasting out a wave that, incidentally, what was happening was, and this is the only way that they could have broadcast before World War I across the Atlantic Ocean. Even though they said, the broadcasts that they were doing, they were a little choppy, they weren't always, so on and so forth. They were bouncing these waves, okay? I mean, if you want to believe that they were bouncing them off of minute particles in the troposphere, or which sphere is it? I might be wrong by saying it was the troposphere. I guess you can believe that, because you can believe whatever you want to believe. You can believe that they can point something at an angle and they can bounce waves off of basically invisible particles. They act as essentially a solid. They act as like a solid sheet of something. Do you understand? When they point these things at them at an angle, but somehow when they point them straight up, they can communicate with their satellites or people that are in space. So I guess they're magic. They're magic. If you point at them at an angle, those signals will bounce off. But I guess if you point it straight out, then they don't. It's magic. Because there's no way it could actually be the firmament, right? The hard, fast boundary, the Rikio, the Shemaim, that's described in the Bible, right? So anyways, they would need more and more power to broadcast at higher and higher frequencies. They started coming up with probably more productive ways of doing this. They would use these instruments that almost looked kind of like a rectangular satellite dish, and they bounced waves. They bounced them off the firmament. That's what they did. They bounced the waves, far easier with those things, but they needed greater and greater power. And really, one of the big issues is how they were generating enough power to be able to do that. And the fact that no real regulations have ever been imposed on anyone doing any of this, on any of the power radio generating, the microwave generating, on dirty electricity, and how dirty electricity. So between dirty and clean seems to be down to basically the type of wave that it produces and whether it's harmful or not harmful to biological life, people in particular. Okay, hold up. I just got sidetracked. Sorry about that. I just stopped a second ago and had to pick back up the next day. So it's the next day now. These things happen when you don't have a lot of time to do this. Let me just bring this all kind of together, because I'm not, for one thing, I'm not through these books. I'm not through finding out everything I can about the way that, radio waves, microwaves, like RF frequencies and EMFs are affecting us. But I do believe that there is a whole lot of energy, a whole lot of evidence out there that these things in fact are. Now, if I can swing that all back around to maybe myself, and the fact that, okay, before Rockefeller and whatever sort of cronies that he was involved with, because I really don't think the son of a snake oil salesman quite achieved what he did on his own. So you've got the Rockefellers representing big oil. Okay, they're representing it. No, I don't think they owned it all themselves. And you have them financing allopathic medicine and the first, school of allopathic medicine. They're financing this, and them and their friends with the small hats. They're hedging out a holistic medicine. They're hedging out homeopathic medicine and hedging in allopathic medicine. Allopathic medicine, which has a very, seek and destroy sort of mentality. And the thing is, it's pushing now drugs, medications, which it's just a sophisticated snake oil sales operation. These are heavily petroleum-based medications, and of course, this whole time they're still pushing their opium-based medications, which they've been on cultures for centuries at least. So you have that, and you do have Freud, right? Who's the obvious bad guy, who's coming along, and he's theorizing that conditions like neurasthenia, which doctors were looking at, and rightfully, I believe, based on the evidence, they were rightfully correlating it to proximity to telegraph lines, electrical lines, and having to do with the sort of radiation emitted from those lines, radio towers. There's just so many examples. The early radio towers on the Isle of Wight and things that happened there, the death of the bees, the chronic illness of the developer of those towers, the chronic illness of his wife, her miscarriage. The evidence just stacks up and stacks up and stacks up to this correlation between radio frequency and electromagnetic frequencies. Okay, and how polluted our air is. And we can see the pollution of local air and it just down through history since the mid-1800s to today. The incidences of things that they called influenza, and how it was never proven to be contagious, and who it struck, and those people's proximity to the early development of military long-range radio wave technology. So what's interesting is starting to correlate that with myself, because the thing is, they were looking at people in the mid to late 1800s when they were taking honest looks at the effects of electricity on man and the environment, biological life, and cells. And one thing they were noticing was that there was a certain portion of the population a lot of researchers thought it was maybe around 10% that were highly susceptible to variations in our very electrified world. Because, even before this massive use of electricity and radio waves, we still live in a world that is full of electricity and electrical currents, from the ground to the sky, in our water. There are currents of electricity everywhere. There are a lot of people that believe that it's really what animates people is a proper sort of balance of electricity. And so what a lot of researchers found out was that somewhere around, I'm going to say the median was maybe around 10%. Some thought it was lower. I don't think anyone thought it was necessarily higher, of people that were sensitive to these electrical fluctuations. They weren't necessarily the elderly. They weren't necessarily children. In fact, a lot of these, what they would consider pandemics and epidemics, oftentimes would most adversely affect people in the prime of their lives. So I think basically from their 20s to their 50s, they would be affected the worst. All right, now we'll bring it to something more personal and specific, myself. I've always been, my whole life, what I would consider sort of an empath. A little bit different than others as far as the way that I perceived a lot of things. Not touchy-feely kind of empath, but definitely perceiving a lot of things in a really different way than most other people did. It did make me kind of strange. What's really interesting was actually when I got to a chapter where the author Furstenberg of The Invisible Rainbow, he started talking about this rash of deaths that were being noticed in professional athletes. Likely mostly because they were far more celebrity status than most other people. But what was happening was there was actually this really big spike in deaths of professional athletes in 1995 and 96. What was really strange as far as he was concerned was the fact that 95, 96 area was when cellular technology was really rolled out in a big way. That's when all the towers were equipped. I mean, even where I lived, you could get a cell phone and use a cell phone, and it was expensive, and you had a very small area that you could use it, in which you weren't roaming, and roaming charges were expensive, but it was there. It was rolled out, and it was in the air. What's really interesting about it was in 95, 96, I was 21, 22. And seemingly out of the blue, really nothing that would have made me think that this was coming. There was, honestly, I really wasn't all that abnormal. Things I was doing, my lifestyle wasn't that abnormal. I partied a lot at that age, but I wouldn't even call it excessive, some alcohol use, some drug use, not anything regular or anything all that significant. Okay? This was not, this really wasn't anything you could say, oh, well, that probably really contributed to it in a significant way. But it started happening just out of the blue. These severe panic attacks, extremely high anxiety. And it got so bad that there was a time there, because it came on just out of the blue. And they were so severe, the panic attacks. And what they did, they usually consisted of just having bouts of severely extreme anxiety. And it wasn't just in public places. So some people considered it agoraphobia, because later on I went to psychologists and counselors and stuff, because we were trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I mean, what had come on me at this time, like a ton of bricks, that was causing this severe disorder. So some thought maybe it was agoraphobia, but the problem was I had it just as bad when I was at home. I went to my regular doctor. He seemed to think that I had physical problems. He thought that I had a problem with my gallbladder disease. The problem was I really didn't. Like, in the long run, I had my gallbladder tested some years later, and it was completely fine. So I'm not saying there was nothing contributing, because it would be a mental and a physical thing, or symptoms that would combine, and they would cause severe anxiety. It wasn't just a public thing like agoraphobia. It happened at home all the time. There was a period there for just about 3 months that I wouldn't leave my home. I would barely eat. I lost a lot of weight. And it was not good. I finally had this psychiatrist that thought he had the answer. He put me on Prozac, which turned me into just a zombie. I didn't think right. I didn't feel right. I discontinued use of that on my own. I did not go back to see him, and I decided I was going to cope with all of this on my own. And it took me about a couple of years to cope with it, to recognize, these symptoms, to cope with it, so on and so forth, and get by. Now, I don't know that those problems, the anxiety, the physical, and all of those things together, really ever went away. And the thing is, from that point forward, I was living in homes where we would, when we could, have as much technology as we could have. When I could afford a cell phone, like I said, I had a very early one, which I did not use very often, but never thought anything of keeping it near me all the time. So there was never even a thought about how any of the EMFs or RFs that were increasing around me, or that I was keeping close to myself, might have anything to do with any of my conditions. It was within not many years of that happening in my early 20s that I started, because I had gone to the doctor for various different things that were going on, and there was just a lot of doctors out there that didn't think anything of prescribing Vicodin and other kinds of painkillers, And the thing about, by the way, I had never really enjoyed doing drugs of any kind. They were like when I was really young, in my late teens and early 20s, before all of this started happening. I would use some of the like experimental drugs, like if somebody had some acid or something like that. Just one of those things where a lot of younger people experiment with those things. It was never, there was never I never enjoyed it all that much to where I just I really wanted some kind of substance, drug, alcohol, whatever. But I did find that the opiates were having an effect on me that was very pleasing. And now it took quite a long time, but eventually we ended up, I was married at the time, first wife. We ended up moving by a guy who was into bodybuilding, and so he juiced. A lot of people who were into bodybuilding use steroids. Lots and lots of them. So he didn't have any problem with needles, and he had a source that he would get his steroids from, and this source also dealt various kinds of pharmaceutical grade injectable opiates. A lot of them mostly like synthesized opiates like Demerol, Nalbuphine, or morphine. And I started using that with him, and that actually started a very, very long period in my life that lasted like 10 or 12 years of using opiates whenever I could. And I mean, I got divorced not that long after that, which the opiates weren't actually a heavy factor in all of that. But, they just continued because once you have very good experiences with opiates, it's really hard to break the use of them. And there's also, physically breaking the use of opiates is extremely hard as well. So anyways, years down the road from that, quite a few years down the road from that, so we're going into like around 2007, 8, 9, I was at the point where I had gotten into a lot of trouble because of the opiate use. So I'd gone to jail a few times. I had been caught boosting merchandise, and I went into a local that county's drug and alcohol prevention court. They call it drug court. In the course of that, I was in that for 2 years. In the course of that, I'd gotten my own apartment, I had a job and all of that. And so as things were going just fine, and I hadn't used anything, of course, there was a few bumps in the road kind of getting there where I had a few relapses and all that. But so by the time, I was working very steady, and for some time, I could start affording certain luxuries, I suppose. And what I decided to do was, this was right around the end of my time in drug court, I decided to have whoever the local big-time provider was, and it may have been Xfinity, which at the time might have been Comcast, it might have been Verizon, I'm not sure. Anyways, they came to my apartment and installed Wi-Fi. And they installed a, Wi-Fi router modem. I had a very small apartment, And the apartment that I had was actually, it was just like sort of like a large squarish rectangle. And it had essentially 4 rooms with a sort of a long, thin bathroom off one of those 4 rooms. Those 4 rooms were very much integrated into each other. Like there were basically open doorways from all of them to the other room. If you wanted to close off one room from the others, there weren't really doors in the doorways. You could put up a curtain or something if you wanted to, But it was really open. And between the kitchen and I guess you would call it the dining room, there was a picture window there that was open as well. Very open place. I got the Wi-Fi router installed in that place in, I believe it was 2011. And kind of just went about my life from there. Now this is close to my life taking another really big nosedive, which was pretty much the last big nosedive that it took as far as just like going to pot. But what I remember was this. It was not long after I got that Wi-Fi router put in. And so I had Wi-Fi. And the only thing I had was a laptop. And I don't remember how I got the laptop. If I bought it used, maybe, I think, from somebody or something. But that's what I had, was a laptop. That's all I had to use. So the Wi-Fi signal's going back and forth with my laptop. My laptop itself is radiating as well, EMFs. And it was not long after this that I noticed that I had this lump under my left arm. Just was kind of there one day. It was really weird. The same thing happened later on, which I'll tell you about. But I mean, almost as if it just appeared. Like it wasn't there Tuesday and it was there Wednesday. It was kind of literally that abrupt. It wasn't necessarily growing. I didn't necessarily notice it growing, but it was just boom, there. My mother and my oldest sister, both nurses, I remember asking both of them about it, and neither one of them, really, they weren't sure. They said, why don't you go to a doctor? So I had really good medical at the job I was at the time, and so I decided to go and get a physical at a local doctor who came highly recommended. So I went to see him. He did the physical. He said I was in really excellent health and shape and everything for my age at that time. And I did bring up the fact, I said, I got this lump under my arm. Don't know what's going on here with this. Now, this is a highly recommended doctor, by the way, and he did a lot of business. And his office was in like prime realty space too. So he's not just getting by. And he's seeing a lot of patients. In a large town that's a university town, that's a very affluent town, okay? So, this guy ought to know his stuff. But all he has me do is some blood work. And because everything looked fine in my blood work, my whites weren't up or anything like that, that was that. So here's kind of what happened. Now this is weird, right? I got this lump. He does a blood work, thinks nothing of it. Now I don't think there's nothing of it because it's a lump under my left arm, man. But what eventually happened was I ended up relapsing. Okay, and that started kind of a long. It's usually like a long downward spiral. And the thing is, once you go through this particular place, this county that I was in Northwest Indiana, once you go through their drug court program and all of that, I mean, you're really in the system, like you're on high profile in the system. So like the local drug task force and all of that, they always got you on their radar. So since I knew other people that were involved in that program, and now since they forced me that whole time I was in that program to go to NA meetings or AA meetings and other stuff, I knew all of the users and the junkies all around there. Like, it was very easy to get right back into the flow of using. So one thing led to another, and I did. And the thing was, I got... they ended up charging me. It was 2 different occasions that I got pinched by these drug task force goons. One occasion, they had a really hard time getting anything to stick on me, and it's because I'm not bragging, but I'm really fast on my feet when it comes to dealing with these people, these drug task force and law enforcement people. I don't like to get caught. I don't like to get charged. Certainly don't like to sit in jail. So they had a hard time getting the first one to stick, the first charge they picked me up on. And that, all of the things that happened for that situation, that's quite a interesting story, let me tell you. But anyways, so it was only like probably 6 months before they got me on the second one. And the way they did that is they got a guy to wear a wire. They got a snitch, okay? And snitches are an extraordinary low life form. People that snitch on other people. They are scum. They truly are, because they're willing to save themselves the trouble that they incurred. You know, whether or not these drug task force or law enforcement people are goons, no matter if they're enforcing not laws, but actually just rules and regulations, that they're really designed just to victimize people. That they're just victimizing the people that they've victimized in the first place by trafficking all of their drugs into this country and dispersing these drugs through the black community specifically, because that gives them power over the white drug addicts. They have this all planned out. So anyways, they had this lowlife snitch wear a wire, and this was while I was using, and he was buying through a girl I knew that I was in this program with, and it's very obvious he lived in the same building I was living in. He had another little unit around the corner of this. It was a very large house that had been converted into like maybe 6 units. And so obviously he knew about what was going on with me, her, and she was supplying to me and intermittently to others, and she had lived there in another unit for some time. Well, anyways, yeah, he knew how to get his butt out of that, because I'm absolutely sure he had snitched in the past, and that's how he got out of other really big charges that he had been on in the past. You see, this guy had also been in that same drug court program. A lot of times when somebody's facing really big charges, they will turn snitch, and one of the things that they'll offer them when they turn snitch is the drug court program. Now, I had been in there and requested the drug court program because it was a second D felony, again, been caught boosting. Stealing merchandise. So, anyways, the second one was because he wore a wire and a camera, and their main target was this girl. And I was pretty much like incidental. So what happened was they ended up arresting me within a few days. They closed in really fast on this one. They don't always do that. This one they did. They arrested me. The charges were complete crap. What they were charging me with was complete crap too. And they actually changed the charges as they went. They do this stuff. They can change charges as they go. If one judge does not get a good charge on you or doesn't accept a certain affidavit or issue a warrant, they can go to another judge and get it issued. The whole system is just as slimy as it gets. And they do what they want. And there are people specifically in that county which are far more powerful than the people that you think are powerful, like the judges and mayors and politicians and stuff. But so anyways, yeah, I was sitting there on a very high felony charge. And there was no way I was going to plead guilty. I wasn't going to cop a plea. I did not take any of their offers. And they came to me with a number of offers that they thought were benevolent offers, like cap 10 with argued sentencing, which essentially means I could get up to 10 years. I have to plead guilty. And then you have this stupid kangaroo court thing called argued sentencing, where you, as the dirty plebe you are, try to argue the merits, or, usually most of the poor, uneducated people out there have their attorney, who is an officer of the court. It doesn't matter if they're a public defendant or private attorney, argue the merits of their case. These attorneys, they don't care. A lot of them want you to go to prison. They don't care. So that's what cap 10 with argued sentencing is, which I wouldn't take. And in fact, I waited there in that jail. I did 14 months sitting in that jail, which 14 months county time is just an eternity. Because I would not plead guilty. And I got the evidence packet from the prosecution sent to the jail and was able to review it months into my stay, and realized that they did not have evidence on that charge. Tried to convince my attorney for quite a long time, an attorney that I had hired with my own money on the first charge I was picked up for, before they had taken me to jail on this other charge. He was assigned to me as a public defender on the second charge, but he still had my money on the first charge. So he wasn't just public defender, and they're getting paid for being in the public defender's office anyways. I told him outright I had reviewed evidence and told him that they didn't have a case. And I pointed out why. And he would never recognize that. I said, legally, they don't have this. Like, if we go to trial, they don't have it. We can really easily prove that I did not do what they're saying, because they were charging me with conspiracy. First off, it was conspiracy to deal in a illicit substance, and then the next charge was actually just aiding in the sale of heroin, which was still a B felony, very high felony, and I was not guilty of that. I was actually, at the time, I was one of the people who was buying from this particular girl, who this snitch was wearing a wire on to get. And I happened to be in the middle, because once he started wearing the wire, I was talking to him, because she wouldn't send him messages. She was sending them to me. And she would say, can you tell him I'm going to be back at this time? And then we sat and BS'd for some time, which in that time I actually had told him the story of what had happened on the earlier charge that I had gotten 6 months ago, which the head of the drug task force didn't take kindly to that, because the things that I did on that charge were a big deal. And what I pulled off was a big deal. And so the warden of the local jail didn't like that. The head of the drug task force didn't like that. The prosecutor didn't like that. So everybody wanted me hit. They didn't have any good, lawful charges. But that didn't matter to them because these people, they don't work in the law. They don't work lawfully. They're gangsters. So I know I went through a lot on that, but here's what happened. In the time that I was in jail, and they do have Wi-Fi and all that in jail, but the thing is, when you're in the pods, there's a lot of concrete and a lot of metal in this place and a lot of glass. You don't have electricity in these places, except for the lights in the cells. And then we had a TV and a microwave in the day room, and then phones over on the wall, and then visitation screen phones on the other wall. But I mean, that was the extent of what we had in there. They did have Wi-Fi in the jail, but I don't think they had them in the individual guard pods, because these are set up, anybody who's been in a county jail or prison situation knows that the way that they set up most of these cell blocks or pods is circular. And they have, a central guard station that watches all of these places sort of in a circle. That's how this was. I don't think they had any of that even in their little guard stations. It was probably just hardwired, LAN, Ethernet. But they may have. If they did, we weren't in contact with it much. Long story short, the lump under my arm actually had gone away while I was in jail. It'd gone away while I was in jail. And it stayed gone away until I had gotten back out a few months later. And I had met my current wife, and we had moved into a small house. And we had Wi-Fi. And I spent quite a lot of time actually right near the Wi-Fi router too, because I had my computer set up right near it. It was also a laptop, but that's where I worked was right near where this was set up. And the swelling had kind of started again under my left arm, and then all of a sudden another swelling in my right shoulder. That's when I think a more competent, responsible doctor that I had at the time, who was a retired oncologist, decided that they needed to look at it for lymphoma, for being lymphoma. The thing is, there does appear to be a correlation in the things that I've had go wrong with me in my life and the presence of RF and EMF, but I would say like heavily RF. And so again, you can't just take something that's anecdotal. But the thing is, I'm adding that anecdotal information on top of a whole heck of a lot of information that there is correlating the presence of RFs and EMFs to all kinds of diseases and maladies, not just cancers, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, ADHD. We're talking about things that have increased and increased and increased and increased as the amount of RF and EMFs in our environment have increased and increased and increased. Furthermore, I would like to add this. There is a marked difference in the way that I feel when I'm in my house, even now, with turning off Wi-Fi, keeping Wi-Fi off, turning off participation and hotspot. And honestly, I'm still working through trying to figure out how all of this, they bundle a lot of information that I think most people aren't entirely aware of or don't entirely understand just into a package, from like a major internet carrier. There are so many aspects to your package and your contract, things that are going on that the average person doesn't understand or doesn't take the time to educate themselves on. And as I said, I went years not educating myself on these things because, for one thing, from the time most of us are born, whoever you are and however old you may be, we're born into a world that treats, for the most part, electricity, and radio waves and microwaves as if they are something that is so common as to be regarded as basically benign. Like, yes, they're there, they run our lights, they deliver signals to us from far away, they help bring us all of our modern conveniences, and even more so, things that we need, not just conveniences, right? Things that we need. They're regarded, really from the time that we're born forward, as basically nothing that we really need to pay attention to. So a lot of us, we just don't pay attention to them. I didn't. I never paid attention to them, of course. But I can tell you this. There is a marked difference between how I feel when I am not only out of my house, because first off, this, sun and fresh air are very good. You need sun, you need fresh air. It's not just out. I can be at a job site. So typically a construction site, that's not running Wi-Fi, and oftentimes will be sites that have very little electricity, sometimes no electricity, maybe ones that are just coming from a generator, or they only have one, temporary outlet post that the local electric company has set up. And I will, of course, typically feel far better. Now, of course, all that time I was still always working with my cell phone, which does emit a good deal of radiation on me or near me. I find it remarkable that when I had the lymphoma and the lymphoma was growing, the two spots that really grew the worst over that course of time were the closest to where I always kept my cell phone. I kept my cell phone on my desk to my left, within a foot of my body, because that was the most convenient place to put it on charge. And then it was always near me if I needed to immediately see texts or notifications or whatever other convenience that we always, that we've become very dependent on. Okay, so it was either always sitting there, or it was always in my back pocket, or if in my tool belt, in a pocket on the right side of me, my waist area, waist and upper leg area. Okay, the two biggest tumors that I had that grew the most were on my left side, under my left arm, and on my right side, to the right of my groin. Those were the ones that grew the worst. Is that coincidence? That those were the two places, those were the two spots closest to my cell phone for years while the cancer was growing. When I am out and I am away from most electricity, unfortunately, as I said, most of the time I would have my phone near me. Now, as of lately, since I've been reading these books, I actually keep my cell phone pretty far from me. Most of the time, I make sure my cell phone is at least 6 to 8 feet away from me, at least. I don't charge it near where I typically am or where my child or my wife typically is. I keep these things in places that are away from them. I'm looking into shields for some of the things that we have in our house. I've got a meter that should be coming today because starting about 5 or 10 minutes ago, it was April 23rd. I'm doing this as usual in blocks of time as I can. So it should be coming today, and I will actually be able to test whether or not this modem, that it's an Aris, I think 1686 from Comcast, whether it is indeed not broadcasting signal when I tell it through the gateway to not broadcast the Wi-Fi signal. If it is not stopping and it is continuing, if it's overriding what I want it to do, then I have to contact them once again. I also have to contact them and ask them why it is that the Ethernet that I have set up and am running through that modem, oftentimes it is performing worse than the Wi-Fi. That should never happen. I've read plenty enough on Ethernet to know that your Ethernet signal should never be underperforming a Wi-Fi signal ever. And if they're not willing to resolve these things, make me happy, I'm going to stop service. I'll start service with somebody else. I'll start fresh with someone else under the really the guidelines that I have set forth for how I'm going to go about protecting my home and family from these things. Because, it's just a fact that Yahweh says in the book of Hosea, my people perish due to a lack of knowledge. And that's what our enemies are counting on, is us having a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding. They count on that for every deception that they pull, disorienting us, keeping us sick, keeping us weak, making us impotent, and all of it relies on a lack of knowledge and understanding. So, there's all of that. I'm sure as I get further on through the particular books that I'm reading on this subject and understand these things in a greater way, I'll probably continue to talk about them more and more, because I think that there are links to be found between electromagnetic frequencies and radio frequencies and all kinds of sicknesses, illnesses, maladies, or what you might call plagues. And I guess that's where we get to, the Bible and the Bible and OBRY part of this episode. I guess some interesting things. One interesting thing is that if you check the Old Testament, you'll see that there is not one word, at least attributed, in a concordance or in, linguistically, in OBRY or Hebrew for air. There's not one word for air or oxygen or whatever. Obviously, there is in Greek, and I'm going to do this in real time. I'll go to, let's see, to where this is at, and it's really bizarre. Now I actually recall seeing this. The word used in Koine Greek that is translated as air is actually air. It's spelled alpha. Let's see. It's alpha, heta. I'm having a brain dead moment. I'm sorry. Why couldn't I remember rho? Okay. Anyways, alpha, heta, rho. The het is a real weird one because when you get into when you get into Koine transliteration from the Septuagint or the New Testament, you'll find that that heta is often used as an e sound, but should oftentimes be linked to not only the OBRY which our modern counterpart is the vowel e, but also to the h, the OBRY ch. I used to think that the h in OBRY, what the Masoretes call chet, ket, I used to actually think that should be a breathy sound. But the more that I look at OBRY words and OBRY pronunciations, the more I see that does not work very well in pronunciation, because there are far too many words that, let's say, end with either an a, or an h, and if you try to pronounce the h with just that breath, all you're going to get is a vowel-ish sound. And the thing is, the vowels, which I often call singers, they exist because they're distinguished because they're breathy, okay? And the consonants are not. That's why I call them walkers. They're not breathy. You can't sing them. You can sing the vowels. They're breathy. You cannot sing the consonants. Anyways, so I actually think that the OBRY H is probably properly pronounced like our CH, ch, okay? Which is interesting when you apply that to a lot of words. Everything becomes very, very interesting now because, for instance, the man who built the ark in Genesis 6 through Genesis 9, now his name is just spelled N-H, and it's translated Noah. But the thing is, I was for a long time when I believed that H was just a breathy ha, would pronounce his name nah, because there was no other way to do it. But if you understand that, first off, you can't pronounce between these consonants that have no vowels between them in a way that would mimic the vowels. That would be confusing. So you would use a minimalist approach. The minimalist approach, as far as a minimalist vocalization approach, would be to put a quick and unaccentuated I sound between these consonants, because I does not mimic any other existing vowel. So I'll give you, an example. Let's take the word, one of the words for river. It's composed of N-H-L. And if you pronounce it with those very quick, unaccentuated vocalizations that do not mimic other vowels, you get nichil. Okay? Just nichil. So you go back to Noah, his actual name, N and H, and if you pronounce it with that more CH sound, the consonantal sound, what you get is a man named Nich. Nich. And you'll notice that Nicholas, as a modern name, you'll find that it's often spelled with that base CH. Nich. Nich. walas. So it's likely that the man who built the ark, his name was in fact Nick. Now, what else is interesting? There's like, I don't want to get too far into it, but there's a whole realm of words whose vocalizations change and help us understand all of the words that we have today, that we use today, that came from OBRY. Like, for instance, there's a chapter I have on seas, and I've already written it. I haven't done final edit on it, but in that I am arguing against Yam Amela, which is the body of water at the end of Yarden, or Jordan. Yam Amela. Now, the Masoretes would have us believe that Mala, which I'll get into how it should be pronounced, that Mala, because they decide if they want you to pronounce an H softly, they can decide that by putting in their dots. Or if they want you to pronounce it very hard, they can decide that by putting in their dots. Okay? So there isn't a consistency, but in OBRY, there would be a consistency. Whenever you see a letter, it should be pronounced the same way, consistently. They want to convince us that MLH, Mala, is salt, so that you call that thing the Salt Sea, and that you equate it with the Dead Sea, because the Dead Sea is the most saline sea that there is. However, the word for fresh and new is LH, la. Putting an M at the front of it turns it into a noun, a thing, instance of a concept or an action. Okay? If the concept or action was LH, la, then the noun instance of it could be Mela. La. Fresh. Okay? Now, what's interesting about that is, so I actually do argue, I go into the linguistics of Mela and La, and why I don't think that was a body of salt water at all, nor does that word imply that it was a salt sea. And I do bring up the fact that LH, in its roots, refers to fresh, new, or moist, sometimes translated as moist. All right, now the interesting thing is discovering that H should actually be pronounced in that CH way, which is basically kind of like a semi-hard consonant. What you now get when you pronounce that word that means fresh, LH, is you get lach. Lach. And I'll let you connect those dots. So yeah, that's interesting. But anyways, so we've got this alpha, heta, rho. It's actually the Koine word for air. It's used, I think, 7 times in the New Testament. They cried out, cast off their clothes, and threw the dust into the air. Therefore, and that was in Acts. So nowhere in the Gospels do we have this word. Acts, 1 Corinthians, I therefore so run, not as certainly, so fight I, not as one that beateth the air. 1 Corinthians 14:9, for you speak into the air. So this is mostly all in letters of Paul or one work by Luke. In Ephesians 2:2, according to the prince of the power of the air, Achar, or I'm thinking Ahar, but they're saying it's Aer. So it's actually a direct. This word is a direct transliteration into English from this Greek word, which we don't seem to find an equivalent in the Old Testament, strangely enough, which you really think you would really think we should. We shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. That's 1 Thessalonians 4:17. We do have it in Revelation 9:2, and he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. Now, I did want to bring up that and just let you know that there isn't actually an equivalent word, which makes things really difficult, because we need to be able to equate these things from the Old Testament. If we're going to look at Revelation, we're going to try to understand Revelation. We need to find equivalents. We need to find what equivalent ideas are expressed throughout the law and the prophets. That has to be our source guide for understanding anything else. That has to be our source guide for understanding and judging this man called Jesus of Nazareth and whether or not he was who he says he is. We have to use the law and the prophets to do that. We have to use the law and the prophets to judge the claims made about and the claims made by and the teachings of this man called the Apostle Paul and any other writings in the New Testament. So that includes Revelation. We have to use the law and the prophets. We have to use the law and the prophets to judge everything that we find in the New Testament. The thing is, the Gospels, specifically Matthew, I really don't want to spend a lot of time on why I'm not yet as solid on John, and I have a little bit of trepidation about Luke and Mark. I think Mark's kind of more of a truncation. We know that portions have been added and taken away from Mark. Luke comes with his own set of issues too, but I'm still not too sure about John, and there's reasons with John. Okay. Matthew, though. And I do mostly source and cite Matthew as far as the Gospels go. Everything that I find about this man, Yeshua, comports with the law and the prophets. Okay? Not everything I find out about or read from Paul does. And there are problems. There's problems with Paul. I still haven't made a complete sort of final. I hate to ever make final decisions, other than the final decision that I am absolutely committed to know the word of Yahweh and follow it to the best of my ability. That's a final decision. Any other decisions about this, I think way too many people out there put the cart before the horse. I think way too many people out there are developing worldviews and theologies and dogmas based on things that they are not entirely aware of. Based on arguments, information that are full of at least question marks. But they're selling a lot of this stuff off as though it were really solid information. And although I know I'm really repetitive about, I don't want to give anybody the impression that you can't rely on the scriptures, because there's overwhelming evidence that the scriptures are quite valid, that they were written by who they were claimed to be written by, most specifically inspired by the Spirit, Ruh of Yahweh. But there are a lot of issues to them too that we have to recognize. When we don't recognize it, it's a weakness. Because it's going to be exploited. Some of the people who really create very fertile ground for someone to just be destroyed by a very apt, very, very intelligent, very subtle sophist, is the King James only people. They are setting up their followers for a real great fall when they come in contact with somebody who really knows their stuff. So, anyways, yeah, there's definitely issues, but that's no reason to call it a day on all of this whatsoever. But we have to look at them. If we're going to be honest, we're going to be on the side of truth. And we truly believe in this Aliyim, God of the Bible. Then we have to recognize the problems. And we have to recognize the fact that other people out there recognize these problems. And a great number of them, like, say, Matt Dillahunty, he's going to exploit them in order to try to prove his point of view. Okay, so look, something to point out about this word, air, okay? It's not the only word in Koine Greek that's used and translated as air. Interesting, all right? Interesting is, okay, so that word in Greek, that air, is G109. The other word that is translated as air is G3772, Oranos. What's kind of interesting about that is, first off, it is phonetically very similar to this first word. And one thing you have to understand about Koine Greek is one of those languages that's very phonetically based. It may, at one time, whatever language it started out being, it may have been glyph-based, which would make each so-called letter meaningful. But since Koine Greek doesn't appear to be a viable, pure source language like OBRY would be, it is phonetic, and that's why so many of the words will phonetically sound familiar. That's why when they transliterate into Koine Greek, they oftentimes use different letters that are diaphones that sound similar. Like, for instance, Omicron and Omega. Because it's phonetic. So you have this air, G109, and you have Oranos, G3772. Now, Oranos is funny because Oranos is used in a number of passages in which the speaker, and many of them, the speaker is Yeshua, Jesus. He's speaking of the kingdom of heaven. And the kingdom of heaven is synonymous with the kingdom of Yahweh, the kingdom of Aliyim, the kingdom of God. If you go to the early Testament, the word for heaven is Shemim. It's in the first verse of the first book of the Bible, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, made Aliyim at Eretz, the earth, and Shemim, heaven, the heavens. It's typically translated as a plural. It's interesting, actually. I just did a word study on that for the OBRY translation of the early Testament that I'm working through very slowly, because every time I get to a word, I actually go to my roots table and make sure I have that root completely treated, because every single root, biglyph root, is going to appear in this table and be fully treated, so that you understand what all the cognates are and what the most likely meaning of that root should be and what the most likely meaning of each individual glyph should be based on overwhelming evidence. Okay, so Oranos, it really just sounds like a variation of air. Koine Greek being a phonetic-based language, we have no reason to look at the fact that there is a upsilon there instead of a heta as, honestly, all that big a deal. And we should probably look at those words and think, okay, those are really similar words. Most likely very similar words. And if that being the case, then it's quite likely that when we see this air, alpha hetero, it's very likely a variation of Oranos. And Oranos should be frequently the Koine Greek rendering of what word whoever it was that put these together in this Koine Greek thought best represented Shamim. Okay, now Shamim is, as I said, it's translated as heavens most of the time in the Old Testament. When you read, for instance, the creation account, what Yahweh does, now he's never called Yahweh in Genesis chapter 1, and this gets into a lot of theories about different manuscripts written by different people and then sort of smashed together. I'm not familiar enough with that. I know about it, and I know why they think what they do about them. I totally get it. And I actually don't think Moses wrote those first 5 books. Did he have something to do with their collation? I don't know that either. When we're talking about, if somebody says, let's say if Yeshua is referring to Moses, he is probably referring to either the books that reference Moses, that have much to do with the time of, or he could be talking about books, for instance, that are associated with him, that perhaps he might have had something to do with collating. I don't know that he had anything to do with collating even those books, and I do think those first 5 books were written by various men, some of them that had direct contact with him. Some of them may actually just be collations from writings that were in part written by him and in part written by somebody else. I actually have full trust that it was Yahweh who made sure that all of the writings that did come together to form those first 5 books as we know them today, came together, were formed, collated, put together as they were under his supervision. It's called inspiration. Yes, I do believe that. Or we do know that he wrote down the laws. Okay? Yahweh did give him the laws, and he did write them down. So, back to Genesis 1. When describing his act of creation, his acts of creation, which Genesis 1 is such a magnanimous, orchestrated event that is going to, as we begin to really understand the source language, how it was used, how ideas are implanted in this language, these combinations of glyphs to form simple and complex words, we're going to understand just how brilliant the creation was and the length of time that it took. But the heavens, Shemaim. Okay, this was formed because there existed in Genesis chapter 2, water. A whole lot of water. And all we really see in Genesis chapter 2 is a whole lot of water. And the spirit of Elohim that is basically above the face of the water, sort of, the language is very interesting. The word used, you're not going to find anywhere else in quite the same form, nor translated in quite the same way. It's rare. But in a sense, sort of darting around over the face, not just like a smooth breathing, but almost like in a charged kind of anticipatory way. Electrical, in a sense, on the face of these waters, perhaps charging these waters. You see, because within a few verses, well, the first thing he does is he commands that there is to be light. And he divides it from the darkness. So, what he's done is he's created light before he's created the sun. He has created light, and we all know that that's a fact, because light comes certainly at the same time the sun comes, but there is light even without the sun, and there is light that exists in and of itself apart from the sun. You can see this. Go outside when the sun is just dawning and look at, say, your car. You're actually going to see a faint shadow under your car that's being cast by the light. And then you will see hard shadows that are very long coming from other things that are being cast by the sun. The sun is a hard light. The sun comes with the light that was created. They are distinct. The sun is always with the light because the sun was created and deemed to rule the day. So it is always with the light. But anyways, within a few verses, all of this water, all of this massive amount of water, he commands that this water should actually be divided. Okay? And he puts a space between it. I'm actually going to go right to, because this portion is just being done in real time, okay? I'm just going to go right to it. So after he divides the light from darkness and deems the names for the light and for the darkness, day and night, Yum and Lila, day and night, then he says, let there be Rakio. Now that's not a space. In the midst of the waters, between the waters, there's this Rakio. Now, I've already done an extensive word study on Rakio, and everything about Rakio alludes to something that is thin, hard and sturdy, and massive, spread out. That is Rakio. He makes this in the midst of the waters to divide waters beneath and waters above. And he names this firmament, this Rakio, Shemim, heaven. So there is certainly a space, because he divided the waters from the waters, and then he caused the dry land to appear amongst the waters below and come together. There is certainly a space between those two things. But what we see when we go outside and we look above the land or above the sea, if we're at the seaside or a lakeside or whatever, we see the Shemim. And whatever science is telling us is air, what it's made of, and so on and so forth. I don't know what to tell you because I don't really have much to say about that. What I am saying is that there's probably enough material for us to equate Oranos and air in the New Testament Koine Greek with Shemaim, which we would see in the Old Testament as sky or heavens, the Rakio. So that really, I would have to say, I guess, by implication, that it would imply everything within that Rakio, the Shemim, to the land and the seas, because it's the land and the seas, the Eretz and the Yamim, the land and seas, that are in contradistinction to the Shemaim or Rakio, which are above. And between it, our scientists have told us there's all kinds of wonderful things in between. Of course, modern science has also told us that Rakio is not above us. That there is not a hard, fast boundary above us. They tell us that there's these layers of atmosphere and then outer space above us. So how much about what they've told us is in our air and what makes all of that up is to be trusted. And for instance, just their opinions and terminologies and things like that are to be trusted. Not necessarily that we have to breathe. For instance, we have to breathe in, we have to breathe out. We have to do that, as part of living. You can't stop breathing and still live. So we have to breathe in, breathe out, whatever it is, whatever this gas, this liquid, whatever this is that we're actually in when we dwell on the land, we have to breathe that in order to survive. When we get high enough off of the earth, it actually is so thin that we need help breathing it in. We need a gas that, usually comes in tanks that they call oxygen to breathe in. But when we see something like this in Revelation 16:17, and they're using the term air, and air would appear to be a variation of Oranos, and Oranos would appear to be a direct correlation to Shemim from the Old Testament, then it might be very fair to regard the fact that he's pouring that on that as everything above us and around us. He poured it out on the air. I guess it's interesting when you look at there's a lot of figurative language that actually happens after this. There have been a lot of guys out there that have done full commentaries on the book of Revelation. I don't necessarily agree with any of them, because I still think that we should be in that phase of understanding the Bible, which is still understanding the constituent parts of it. And I haven't heard just about anybody out there who has done a lot of these full commentaries really pay, I think, appropriate attention to all the constituent parts, which can really cause variations that are different than what we've come to understand so far. This is why I won't adhere to, for one thing, any of the the going accepted models for interpreting Revelation. First off, I think that most of them are doing it from very, very much a modern, quote-unquote, Christian perspective. And I think that that's an error at best, and at worst, it's malicious. You know, some of the people that have really influenced how we look at Revelation were people that they're not trustworthy people. I would not trust the Guinnesses. I don't think they are good old Gaelic, Gaulish, Irish folk. Okay? And H. Groton Guinness is one of the biggest figures in historicism, which, of course, takes the burden of much of the wars against the true Israel. It takes the burden off those responsible, being non-Israelite whites who had been running the kingdom that we know of as Europe, and were running the kingdoms that we know of as Tartaria, and and all that from antiquity. Those people, and then the latecomer, the little horn of Daniel 7, being what we know of as the Ashkenazim today, and various outlying players, but it's mostly the Ashkenazim. They are very much the central fulfillment of that little horn from Daniel chapter 7 that was the latecomer in all of those horns on that last beast. They take the burden off of them, and they really confuse the issue, of course. People have worked very hard in the last 5+ centuries to make Christianity into what it is as we understand it today, either in a Catholic sort of a way of understanding, or Protestant evangelical way of understanding, as opposed to the way we should understand it based on the law and the prophets, first and foremost, who Israel is, Israel's part to play, role to play in this world, and in how everything is going to be playing out. You cannot divorce all of that from the New Testament and just come up with this new different religion to suit you. Sorry. Now, if you're somebody who really loves the Bible, and you really want to obey the Bible, and you want Yeshua, Jesus Christ, to be, your king over you, then certainly behave as one of his subjects. I will be quite happy with that. I don't care which tribe you are, as far as white people, or what race you are, or what tribe you are from those other peoples. I applaud you. I would be very happy. I would not regard you as my enemy. But the war that's being waged, and who it's being waged by, they're counting on a lot of very false arguments. They count on a lot of weaponized words to make up these false arguments. However, so those understandings of Revelation, and let's just say eschatological prophecy, I really reject all of them, because in part who the source for a lot of them are, not all of them, and how they are, let's just say the basis for their interpretations are based in this divorcement in concepts, and in the steady, consistent stream of story that we see in the Bible, and all of the covenants made with the patriarchs in Israel forward. And I think misunderstandings about salvation and other issues, they've all been really twisted, really bad, so that in part we wouldn't understand who we are, the heirs of this kingdom of heaven and what our responsibilities are as those heirs of this kingdom. This, as opposed to the model that our enemies have created in order to try to cancel our arguments. This is not an argument about being racist and not liking people that are not your own, hating people that are not your own. This has nothing to do with that. These are concepts that have been put in place simply to cancel out the importance of these things. They've also been done to make us think that there's no very sharp and distinct difference, say, between, Gauls and Germanics and other white people. Again, we don't have to talk about better or worse. That's not the issue. That's not the issue. The issue is who it is that Yahweh made the covenants with. Therefore, who it is that he's going to keep his covenants in and through. That's the issue. So if you're somebody out there who maybe aren't from these peoples that have all of the marks of Israel, there's no reason to get bent out of shape about it. As I've already said, you want Christ as your king, you want to obey him, you want to obey the Bible, please do. Because it's just going to make the world a better place. We can talk about soteriology and your ideas of salvation and heaven and the afterlife and all of that in a very different context. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a people with which a covenant was made and a race which we see being followed from Genesis 2 forward. And we are talking about the whole creation and how every creature is involved in the creation, who it is that the covenants were made with and their importance and their responsibilities, how that affects every life form on this earth. So, yeah, there's a lot of interesting, symbolic, likely metaphorical language just in the last, 5 verses of Revelation chapter 16, starting with verse 17, which is the one that we see where the angel pours out his vial on the air. Now, I'll tell you what, I am going to read these 17. I will read them from the World English Bible because the King James, though it's really good for referencing, when you have to reference, which means you probably have to use a concordance, it's good for that, as is the New American Standard, because they also have a Strong's for New American Standard. However, World English Bible reads far, far better, and in a number of instances is translated better. But Revelation 16:17 through 21 says, the seventh, being the seventh angel, poured out his bowl into the air. A loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, "It is done." There were lightnings, sounds, thunders. There was a great earthquake, such as not since there were men on the earth. So great an earthquake, so mighty. The great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nation fell. Babylon the Great was remembered in the sight of God to give to her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. Every island fled away. The mountains were not found. Great hailstones, about the weight of a talent, came down out of the sky on people, people blasphemed God because of the plague of hail, for this plague is exceedingly severe. Now look, just between you and me, I'm not really too sure what portions of that are symbolic and what portions are meant to be taken literally. I would think that there are ways of knowing that which would entail very, very careful study. Because you got to remember, Revelation is a book that is, in a sense, it is almost like a cipher to the law and prophets and writings, and vice versa. So I'm not entirely sure. However, I will say that it is noteworthy that based on everything I'm looking at, reading and studying about all of our plagues, and ADHD, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, infant leukemia, birth defects and brain cancers in children. Those are plagues. Those are plagues. Those are diseases. And I know no good church folk want to believe that their children have been plagued. That's so hard because it's their child. But the hard truth is that Yahweh makes it very, very crystal clear. If our shepherds, and they're the ones who claim to be our shepherds, by the way, if our shepherds were doing the jobs that they are amply paid to do, they're given ample pay and a great deal of respect. They have good lives, these people. If they were doing their jobs, they would be warning us that Yahweh says, if you don't care about my law, I will not care about your children. They would warn us. But they don't. They don't warn us. So I think that it is at least noteworthy that what appears to be the source of such a great many plagues infesting our lives, slaughtering many of our children, making our lives utterly degenerate in so many ways. It appears that these things have a very distinct correlation to the last century and a half of electrification and radio waves, microwaves, blasting waves throughout the air, bouncing them all over the place off of the firmament, the Shemim. These are dangerous. They would appear to become more and more dangerous the closer and closer we are to our technology. And I'll tell you, like, for instance, I have AirPods because I got them when I got a new phone. I had to get a new phone. The old one got broken. And I didn't realize that it did not have a 1/4-inch jack. Now, even if I had, it really wouldn't matter today, because I wouldn't want my phone near my person for long enough to even listen through a set of wired earbuds. But anyways, I have them. And yeah, I do use them every once in a while when I need to. If I need to actually make a call and be moving, then I use them, because I'd actually rather have those in my ear than have the cell phone directly up to my skull. Okay? But it is very, very rare. It is very rare because I don't want that stuff that close to my person or the person of my family's at all whenever possible. Okay, now, to be totally honest, I don't know the full extent of what EMFs are coming off of what, as far as what appliances, what machines, and how much radio frequencies are being put out in my home, whether or not, for instance, our modem router is turning off when I turn it off at the gateway. I don't know what extent even a small little handheld game like, I don't know, my wife has one of the, like a Nintendo Game Boy, the little green. It's got a flip open and a screen on top, screen on the bottom, and with like Nintendo controllers. Okay, that little thing. I don't know what that produces as far as EMFs. That's why I'm getting the meter. I want to protect my family as much as I can. That's why I'm continuing educating myself on the dangers and the correlations between EMF and RF exposure and sicknesses and diseases and maladies of the day. Is there a direct correlation between the verse that I just read to you and the subsequent verses and what we experience in all of the pollution in our air through EMFs and RFs? I don't know for sure yet. But I'm bringing it up. I'm bringing it up because it's noteworthy. I'm bringing it up because also, if any of us just pay attention to the way we feel or the way that we or our children act and behave when they are interacting with electronic devices or devices that may be sending, receiving radio frequencies, microwaves, and how different they act after they've been in contact with something like that for an hour. How prone they or we are to overeating when we spend a great deal of time around objects that are emitting EMFs or sending, receiving frequencies, radio, microwave frequencies. You'll notice that it is noteworthy. It's remarkable, in fact. Is there a correlation between how utterly dependent we are on these technologies to where it's so hard to give up? So recently I gave up listening to my phone all the time. I would listen to my phone frequently every day for a little while through AirPods, which, as I said, I gave up using those regularly. I very seldom use those. I even gave up listening to it really just to get information, because I would scour platforms, YouTube, still, because there are still some decent channels on YouTube, and there's a lot of information that's like decent, good information channels still on YouTube, like how to make everything, things like that, BitChute, Odyssey, World Truth Videos. There's brand new tube. So anyways, and then there's platforms like, say, Eurofolk Radio. There's the Sheldon Emery Memorial Library, so on and so forth, right? So I would, scour all these various platforms, websites, find things that I wanted to listen to and listen to them. Now, when I decided that it wasn't all that good for me to have my cell phone near me that often, and it wasn't good for me to have those AirPods in ever, I had to go about giving that up. Now, I did justify this for years, listening to things a lot, and typically through earbuds or even AirPods, as educating myself. I have a lot to do, and I have to educate myself, and a lot of us have had to. A lot of us have had to squeeze in a lot of education in a really short time. Fortunately, not all of us are as sensitive to EMFs and RFs as others, okay? Many are nowhere near as sensitive, and perhaps they won't get these maladies, these diseases, or at least certain ones, as easily as other people might. But that's still no reason to take too many risks. So when I stopped, one thing that I've started finding is really a majority of the things that I would listen to for hours and hours every day, they weren't necessary. A lot of them were just junk. A lot were just junk. And, in saying that, and I would have to think, what all of us are going to have to do is probably consider, how much we need this information, A, but B, how we are taking it in. Because I know there are a lot of people that do spend a great deal of their time ingesting information so that they can be better educated and better informed. I get that. But yeah, we have to consider these things, and or I would at least suggest that we do, and I would suggest that we consider how necessary these things are every day, or frequently. And I will give up a number of people listening to me if it actually helps them to break free of their dependence on not only the convenience, but there seems to be a very real addictive quality, if you want to call it a quality, to this stuff. Now, there is also the quote after this, when the author of Revelation is actually seeing he's getting a description that's helping us tremendously understand Babylon and this beast that Mystery Babel is writing, where it does say, "Come out of her, my people, lest you share in her plagues." Is that not correct? Well, let's see. I'm looking at 17 right now. Sorry. 17, is it 18? I know you guys know. I know you guys know what it's referring to because all of you have heard it. But I'd hate to put it out there without being able to say, okay, and you can reference it here, right? Revelation 18:4. I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that you have no participation in her sins, and that you don't receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached to the sky, and God has remembered her iniquities. Return to her just as she returned, and repay her double as she did, and according to her works. In the cup which she mixed, mix to her double." How much is what I'm saying about this problem that seems to be at the root of many plagues is being addressed here? I don't know. Just going to be honest with you. I don't know. I know there's a lot of symbolism that you're going to find absolutely throughout the book of Revelation. There's a lot of symbolism that you're going to find in the Old Testament prophets and writings, and even portions of the law. That's very true. And I'm not claiming to be an expositor of the book of Revelation. All the point of this was to talk to you about what I've been finding out and how these dangers and issues surrounding these frequencies, electrical frequencies and radiation, radio frequencies and radiation, microwaves, how I have experienced it myself and what information that there is out there on it, to give you an idea of it and to tell you that when I started understanding it, some of these things came to mind, and at least put those things out there and in your mind. And that was the purpose. So I hope I did it. I hope you got something out of this. I do hope that all of you will be safer than I've been with electronics and radio frequency devices, that you will educate yourself on these things, and maybe I'll be able to learn more from what those of you out there are doing concerning these things. And, we'll all grow together and get away from just this addiction and dependence on these conveniences, which aren't free. They're not free. First off, we have to pay our slave wages to get them, and they seem to come with a cost that is very high. That's all. They seem to have a far greater cost than we may really be aware of right now. Okay, so with that, I'm just going to wrap this up, and hopefully be back with you with, very different topics quite soon. All right, so everybody, take care.